Let's start with the Stellantis numbers before we get on to Renault then. What kind of stood out to you from these numbers? There's the softness, there's the weakness in terms of the US market, there's the build-out of the dealership inventories. What was the key drag on Stellantis in this quarter?
Yeah, I think you hit it there. I mean, the concern for weeks now has been stacking up about the fact that Stellantis has been, I would say, just the least disciplined among the major players in the U.S. market in terms of maintaining their inventories and overbuilding. There's been, executives leaving that company left and right. It was really a remarkable, execution story for quite some time. And that's really sort of, broken down. And I think, when we look across the companies reporting this morning or late yesterday in the case of Renault, and even Renault, strong results in terms of profitability, but this was not achieved by way of volume. And so I think consistently we're seeing, kind of an issue of, companies not being able to sort of count on demand being there. And no longer in a state of, if we build it, we've got demand for it. We're starting to see, some, kind of cream rise to the top. And I think Nissan and Stellantis, unfortunately, have not been executing the way, say, Toyota or even a General Motors has in the last, quarter or couple of quarters.
That's really interesting that you put the spotlight on the question around execution and how these businesses are executing in what looks like a more challenged environment. You talk about the difference then when it comes to Renault. Are they executing? Is that where the driver has come through from this? Excuse the pun, but their profitability coming through pretty decently in terms of the first half.
Yeah, I think this was a company that had a lot of issues before Luca De Meo came in, and I think he's gotten a lot of credit for really, turning the company around, bringing costs more in line, but also getting more out of higher trim models, out of more profitable SUVs as opposed to on the passenger car side. There is something to be desired in terms of electric vehicles, and it wasn't so long ago that they were trying to spin out the EV and battery business, and that really, in retrospect, it was a good thing that they didn't move forward with that, because I think there are still concerns about their ability to deliver on that business. But sort of a similar story to GM, where the sort of old school business, if you will, the SUVs and gas powered vehicles is really holding up well as the company has some challenges with making the transition to EVs.
Craig, you spent a lot of time of your career, a big part of your career, in Japan. You understand Japanese automakers like many other people do not. You understand the story around Nissan, and you've followed it through and across many a year. In terms of this company then, full-year operating income forecast has been cut. It's missed its estimates. What is Nissan doing wrong?
I mean, this company, to be honest, has been a mess. In the wake of Carlos Ghosn coming down, it's really been a pretty consistent story. When you look at Renault and Nissan and compare these two, it used to be the case that Renault was kind of the ugly stepchild of this alliance. This alliance has really sort of fallen apart, and Nissan, frankly, has looked lost. And product-wise, they don't have a great story to tell. They really have some issues with an aged lineup. You look at the Infinity luxury brand, and you really sort of kind of scratch your head at what the strategy is there. The electric vehicle, efforts at that company have not been strong. And so I think, it's hard, honestly, to find a sort of silver lining here, where this company's, shares also, reflect the fact that they've had issues from a volume perspective, execution, branding. It's really sort of across the board, unfortunately.